The Xerion War Academy pulsed with the soft, rhythmic glow of photosynthetic energy webs, their yellow-green luminescence casting eerie reflections across the biomechanical walls. Commander Xerwind stood motionless before the holographic display, his emerald-scaled fingers tracing the projection of a human battlefield. An ancient one, by galactic standards. The image flickered with crude explosions, the jerky movements of primitive armored vehicles, the chaotic scramble of human soldiers. To the Xerion, it should have been nothing more than a curiosity, a relic of a species too young to understand true warfare. Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, a reflexive gesture of unease. The humans had fought here, not with the precision of the galactic accord, not with the cold, calculated efficiency of the Xerion's living weaponry, but with something far more unsettling. They had fought like creatures who did not know when to die. Arsec, the Academy's lead xenostrategist, approached, his bioluminescent veins pulsing faster in agitation. "You see it too," he murmured, his voice a low hum of organic resonance. Xerwind did not answer immediately. His gaze remained locked on the projection, on the moment when the human defensive line had been shattered, their positions overrun. By all logic, the battle should have ended there. Surrender, retreat, or annihilation. Those were the only outcomes permitted by the Invincible Doctrine, the sacred tactical principles that had governed interstellar warfare for millennia. But the humans had done none of those things. Instead, they had counterattacked, not as a disciplined force, not with the elegant synchronization of Xerion battle pods, but in a screaming, bloodied frenzy. Soldiers with broken limbs had dragged themselves forward to fire their weapons. Squads, cut off from command, had charged entrenched positions with nothing but blades. Wounded humans had detonated explosives strapped to their own bodies rather than be captured. It was madness. It was impossible. Ursek exhaled sharply, his respiratory vents flaring. Their psychological resilience defies all models. No species should be capable of this level of persistence in the face of certain defeat. Xerwind finally turned away from the projection, his mind churning. The Invincible Doctrine was built on a simple, unshakable truth. Once a force was broken, it stayed broken. Morale was a quantifiable metric. Fear was a predictable variable. But the humans had rewritten the equation. Somewhere in the depths of the Academy's archives, there were newer records of human wars fought not with crude ballistic weapons, but with starships and energy cannons, records that showed the same terrifying pattern repeating itself, even as their technology advanced. Xerwind's claws flexed involuntarily. If the humans had learned to fight like this when they were weak, what would they become when they were strong? The war simulations flickered in the dim glow of the Xerion Academy's tactical chamber, casting eerie yellow-green reflections across the smooth biomechanical walls. The air hummed with the low pulse of photosynthetic energy webs, their emerald veins pulsing like slow, steady heartbeats. Xerwind stood motionless, his chitinous fingers tracing the holographic projection of a human battlefield. An ancient conflict, one fought with crude metal projectiles and chemical explosives. The data streams scrolled beside it, cold and clinical, quantifying every death, every retreat, every last stand. And yet, the numbers lied, because the humans should have broken. Ursek's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the chamber's living machinery. Their neural responses don't align with any known species. Fear triggers something in them, not paralysis, not submission, but adaptation. Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, filtering the harsh bioluminescence. He had seen the recordings, he had studied the battles, and still, his mind refused to reconcile the data with reality. The humans had been outnumbered, outgunned, their supply lines severed, their commanders dead. And yet, they had fought back, not in disciplined formations, not with calculated retreats, but in desperate, clawing surges. They had turned rubble into fortresses, corpses into barricades. They had bled and burned and kept moving. Ursek manipulated the projection, zooming in on a single engagement. A human soldier, his uniform torn, his weapon empty, charging a fortified position with nothing but a blade. The statistics flashed in amber glyphs. Fey chance of survival. The soldier had won, not through superior firepower, not through tactical brilliance, but through sheer incomprehensible refusal to die. Xerwind's mandibles twitched. This is not warfare. This is madness. Ursek's tendrils coiled in uneasy agreement. By all known doctrine, they should have surrendered, should have broken, but they don't. They can't. A new projection flickered to life. A more recent conflict, human warships, sleek and angular against the void, their hulls scarred from battle. The data streams showed the same pattern. Ships crippled, crews decimated, and yet the humans fought on. A single vessel, its engines dead, its weapons exhausted, had rammed itself into a Xerion dreadnought rather than be boarded. The explosion had torn through both ships, leaving nothing but wreckage. A deliberate act. Xerwind's claws flexed. The invincible doctrine had no answer for this. No species was supposed to choose death over surrender. No species was supposed to thrive in the face of annihilation. The humans did. Ursek exhaled, his bioluminescent patterns dimming in unease. We must revise our models, if this is how they fought when they were weak. What will they do when they are strong? Xerwind did not answer, because he already knew, and the knowing terrified him. The war room pulsed with uneasy light, the organic walls of the Xerion command vessel exhaling faint tendrils of yellow-green bioluminescence. The air smelled of ozone and something deeper, the musk of living machinery, the hum of photosynthetic energy webs woven through the ceiling. Xerwind stood motionless before the holodisplay, his chitinous fingers tracing the edges of the latest battle report. The data streams coiled like serpents, replaying the engagement in cold, clinical detail. Human ships, outnumbered, outgunned, had done the impossible. Ursek's tendrils flickered in agitation as he adjusted the projection, zooming in on the wreckage of a Xerion cruiser. Its biomechanical hull had been torn open, not by plasma lances or antimatter warheads, but by something far more primitive. A kinetic impact. A human destroyer, its engines crippled, its weapons spent, had turned itself into a spear and rammed straight through the cruiser's core. The footage looped, the human vessel, bleeding atmosphere, its hull glowing red, hot from re-entry burns, had accelerated in its final moments. Not away, not in retreat, toward the enemy, Xerwind's mandibles tightened. This was not desperation, this was calculation. They do not break. Ursek's voice was a whisper, his bioluminescence dimming in unease. The words hung in the air like an accusation. The invincible doctrine had no answer for this. No species was supposed to fight like this. No species was supposed to choose annihilation over surrender. The humans did. Xerwind exhaled, his carapace vibrating with the weight of realization. The simulations had been wrong. The projections had been wrong. The galaxy had been wrong, because humanity did not fight like a cornered beast. They fought like fire, unpredictable, relentless, and utterly indifferent to the cost. The holodisplay shifted, pulling up another engagement, this one older, from humanity's early wars, a primitive conflict fought with chemical explosives and crude projectiles. The same pattern emerged. A human soldier, bleeding out in the mud, had crawled toward an enemy position. His weapon was empty, his body was broken, and still, he had pulled the pin on his last grenade. Ursek's tendrils coiled in revulsion. This is not combat. This is madness. Xerwind said nothing, because he understood now. This was not madness. This was strategy. A strategy the galaxy had never seen before. A strategy that worked. The projection flickered again, this time showing a human fleet engagement. Ships burning, hulls rupturing, no retreat, no surrender, just forward. Always forward. Ursek's voice was hollow. They're commanders. They allow this, they expect it. Xerwind's claws flexed. That was the true horror. This was not desperation. This was doctrine. Human doctrine. And if they had fought like this when they were weak, what would they do when they were strong? The answer coiled in his gut like a living thing, and utterly inescapable. The war room fell silent. The holodisplay dimmed, and in the fading glow of the bioluminescent walls, Xerwind made a decision, one that would change the course of the war. One that would change the course of the galaxy. Because the Xerion had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed humanity could be understood. They had assumed humanity could be broken. But now, staring into the abyss of human defiance, Xerwind realized the truth. Humanity could not be broken because humanity was the abyss. And the abyss stared back. The Xerion war room pulsed with uneasy light, the organic walls exhaling faint luminescence, like the slow breath of some great, wounded beast. Xerwind stood motionless, his chitinous fingers tracing the grooves of the command console, living metal, warm beneath his touch, threaded with veins of photosynthetic energy. The air smelled of ozone and something deeper, something wrong. The scent of a paradigm shattered. Arsek's report still flickered in the holodisplay's afterglow. Human war footage, human sacrifice, not desperation. Xerwind's mandibles twitched. The Xerion High Command had ordered immediate countermeasures. If humanity fought without restraint, then the Xerion would learn to do the same. If they embraced brutality, then the Xerion would perfect it. Arsek had protested. Xerwind had overruled him. Now, in the quiet hum of the war room, the decision settled like a blade between his ribs. Xerion Military Academy, Orbital Nexus K-Fe, the training halls of the Xerion elite, were not like human barracks. There were no cold steel bunks, no sterile corridors. Here, the walls lived curving, breathing structures of mechanical weave, their surfaces studded with glowing nodes that pulsed in time with the cadets' heartbeats. The air thrummed with the low resonance of symbiotic machinery, a harmony of flesh and living metal. Cadet Vexis adjusted her neural interface, the tendrils at her temples flexing as she synced with the simulation pod around her. A dozen others did the same, their carapaces gleaming under the emerald light of the chamber. Today's lesson, human warfare. The pod sealed around her, its inner membrane adhering to her exoskeleton like a second skin. Data flooded her mind, tactical readouts, historical archives, the recorded screams of human soldiers charging into certain death. The simulation began. Human forward outpost, designation. Iron Gate's Vexis blinked, and suddenly she was there, kneeling in frozen mud, her breath fogging in the biting air of a human war zone. The sky was a bruised purple, streaked with smoke. The ground trembled beneath her, not from artillery, but from something deeper, something alive. A human voice barked orders. Commander Samantha Foster. Vexis turned, her borrowed human eyes struggling to focus. Foster stood atop a ruined barricade, her face streaked with grime, her rifle slung across her back like an afterthought. She wasn't looking at the enemy, she was looking at her soldiers, and she was smiling. Listen up, maggots. Foster's voice was a wheat's crack, cutting through the chaos. They think they can break us. They think, well, run. She spat into the dirt. But we don't run, we hold. Vexis felt something stir in her chest, an unfamiliar heat. The humans around her didn't cower, they grinned. Then the sky split open. Xerion assault wave, the first plasma barrage, hit like a hammer of godfire. The ground erupted, molten earth spraying in all directions. Vexis staggered, her human ears ringing, her borrowed lungs burning. She expected panic. She expected rout. Instead, she heard laughter. A human, Corporal Hale, clapped her on the shoulder, his teeth bared in a feral grin. First time getting shelled, kid. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Then he was gone, sprinting toward the firestorm. Vexis watched, numb, as the humans charged, not away from the bombardment, but into it. They moved like a single organism, a swarm of defiance. their weapons spitting fire as they closed with the advancing Xerion drones. One soldier, Mitchell Torres, leapt onto a collapsing barricade, his armor scorched, his face a mask of blood. He didn't hesitate. A ragged, roaring chorus rose from the human lines, voices tangled together in something that was not a battle cry, not a hymn, but something worse, something joyous. Vex's borrowed heart pounded. This was not desperation. This was celebration. Simulation terminated, the pod hissed open, spilling Vexis onto the academy floor. Her limbs trembled, her neural interface throbbed with residual adrenaline. Around her, the other cadets were silent. Ursek stood at the chamber center, his bioluminescent markings dim with something that might have been sorrow. "Well?" he asked softly. Vexis opened her mouth, closed it. What could she say? That she had felt the humans' defiance like a fire in her veins, that she had understood, for one terrible moment, why they fought this way. That she was afraid, not of their weapons, but of the thing inside them that no amount of Xerion logic could explain. Ursek's voice was gentle. "You see now." Vexis bowed her head. The Xerion could mimic human tactics. They could replicate human weapons, but they could never be human. And that, she realized with dawning horror, was why they would lose. The simulation chamber hummed with residual energy, its organic walls pulsing faint amber as if digesting the violence they had just witnessed. Vexis pressed her palm against the slick vine, like flooring, feeling the thrum of the Academy's living infrastructure beneath her fingers. It was supposed to be comforting, a reminder of Xerion unity, of the harmony between biology and machine. It felt hollow now. Ursek's bioluminescent markings flickered as he studied the cadets. His voice, when it came, was measured, the way one might speak to wounded animals. "You have questions." Vexis swallowed. Her throat was dry. She had so many questions. Why had the humans fought like that? Why had they refused to break, even when logic dictated surrender? Why had their defiance felt less like desperation and more like contempt? But the one that burned hottest in her mind was simpler. How do we kill something like that? Ursek gestured, and the chamber's walls rippled, extruding a data terminal from its living architecture. Amber light coalesced into holograms, battle records, casualty reports, tactical analyses. The numbers glowed, stark and unyielding. Vexis stared. The humans had lost, technically. But the cost? Her secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, an instinctive recoil. The casualty ratios were grotesque. For every human soldier felled, the Xerion had paid in blood threefold, sometimes fivefold, sometimes more, and the humans knew it. That was the worst part. They had calculated it. Ursek's voice cut through her thoughts. This is what their commanders call the butcher's bill. He gestured at the projections. They do not measure victory in territory held or objectives taken. They measure it in exchange. Vex's spines flattened against her back. A cold, merciless arithmetic. The humans would let their own die, would sacrifice them, if it meant the enemy died faster, if it meant the enemy learned fear. And the Xerion had. She could see it in the way her fellow cadets shifted, their bioluminescence dimmed with unease. The simulation had been a lesson, yes, but not the one they expected. They had thought they were studying prey. Instead, they had found something that hunted back. Ursek's voice was quiet. Their resilience is not biological. It is not technological. It is psychological. He paused, and it defies all known doctrine. Vexis exhaled. That was the truth, wasn't it? The Xerion could match human weapons, could replicate their tactics, could even, in time, mimic their adaptability. This willingness, she had felt it in the simulation. The human soldier's last stand, the way he had grinned through shattered teeth as he triggered the explosives, the way he had laughed. The Xerion could not replicate that. And that, she realized with slow, creeping dread, was the true horror of humanity. Not that they fought, but that they enjoyed it. The chamber's lights pulsed once, then dimmed, a silent verdict. Arsik turned away. "Prepare for debrief," he said softly. Vexis did not move. She was still staring at the numbers, still counting the dead, still wondering, with a sick, sinking certainty, if the Xerion had already lost and just didn't know it yet. The containment chamber hummed with the low, pulsing thrum of Xerion bio. Energy, its walls woven from living metal that flexed like muscle beneath its emerald sheen. The air smelled faintly of ozone and chlorophyll, the scent of their photosynthetic power cells at work. At the center of it all, strapped to an organic restraint slab, was the human. Captain Mitchell Torres. Xerwind observed him from behind the chamber's semi-transparent membrane. His yellow-green eyes narrowed. The human was injured. His left arm was a mess of hastily sealed burns, his face streaked with dried blood, but his breathing was steady. His dark eyes were open, watching the ceiling with an eerie calm. That was the first anomaly. A Xerion soldier, even one of the elite, would have been screaming by now. The neural restraints alone should have induced agony, living filaments threaded beneath the skin, pulsing with electric feedback designed to overload pain receptors. But Torres, he was silent. Ursik stepped forward, his bioluminescent crest flickering in unease. "His vitals are stable," he murmured, studying the holographic readouts hovering above the slab. Adrenaline levels elevated, but not spiking. Cortisol production is suppressed. His neural activity suggests... "Suggest what?" Xerwind demanded. Ursik hesitated. "He is not afraid." A ripple passed through the gathered Xerion officers. Fear was the foundation of all warfare. Fear of death, fear of pain, fear of loss. It was the lever by which battles were won. A soldier who did not fear was a soldier who could not be broken. And yet, here was Torres. Xerwind stepped closer, his clawed fingers flexing. "Human," he said, voice modulated through the chamber's translation matrix. "You are aware of your situation." Torres didn't look at him. His lips twitched, not a grimace, not a snarl. That was the second anomaly. Ursik's tendrils stiffened. "He is amused." Xerwind's mandibles clenched. "Explain yourself, human." Finally, Torres turned his head. His gaze was sharp, focused, not the glassy stare of a prisoner in shock, but the calculating look of a predator assessing its cage. "Just thinking," he said, voice rough but steady. "You guys really don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" Torres exhaled. A slow, deliberate breath. Then he laughed. It wasn't hysterical. It wasn't forced. It was genuine. The sound sent a shiver through the chamber. "You think this is about winning," Torres said. "About tactics. About firepower. But it's not." His smile widened, bloody and defiant. "It's about how long." Xerwind's pulse quickened. Elaborate Torres shifted against his restraints, testing them. The filaments beneath his skin flared brighter, sending jolts of pain through his nervous system. But his expression didn't change. "You're gonna try to break me," he said. "And you won't. You're gonna try to scare me, and you can't." His eyes locked onto Xerwind's. "Because I already decided how this ends." Ursik's voice was barely a whisper. "What does that mean?" Torres leaned back, relaxed. "Means I'm not your prisoner," he grinned. "You're mine." The chamber fell silent. The Xerion exchanged glances. This was not how interrogations were supposed to proceed. Prisoners begged. Prisoners bargained. Prisoners broke. Torres did none of those things. Xerwind felt something cold coil in his gut. This wasn't resistance. This was control. The alarms blared. The containment chamber's walls shuddered as the station systems flared red. Ursik whirled, tendrils flaring in alarm. Breach detected. Human forces. They're boarding. Xerwind's gaze snapped back to Torres. The human was still smiling. "Told you," he said softly. And outside, in the void beyond, the first explosions lit up the dark. The station trembled. Xerwind felt it first in his bones. a deep resonant thrum that pulsed through the organic lattice of the Xerion outpost. The walls, usually alive with soft yellow-green bioluminescence, flickered erratically, their rhythmic pulse devolving into jagged panic strobes. The air tasted metallic, charged with the acrid tang of ruptured energy conduits. Ursek's tendrils coiled tight against his torso, his voice a hiss of disbelief. They dared. Torres remained motionless in his restraints, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, Xerwind had studied enough human physiology to recognize the glint there. Not fear, not desperation, anticipation. The alarms wailed, their tones shifting from warning to outright distress. The containment chamber's primary shield flickered, its bioorganic matrix destabilizing as something brutal hammered against the station's outer defenses. Ursek's data pad chimed, its surface alive with frantic glyphs. Multiple breaches, he murmured, his voice hollow. They're not just boarding, they're carving their way in. Xerwind's mandibles tightened. This was impossible. The Xerion outpost was a fortress of living metal, its defenses grown from the same photosynthetic alloys that powered their warships. No species had ever breached one so quickly. No species should have been able to. A distant explosion rocked the station. The deck plates groaned, their fibrous structure straining. Somewhere beyond the chamber, the rhythmic pulse of Xerion security drones stuttered, then fell silent. Torres exhaled, slow and deliberate. "You keep thinking this is about force," he said, his voice almost conversational. "It's not." Xerwind turned on him, his emerald carapace darkening with agitation. "Then what is it about?" Torres smiled. The door exploded inward, not with the clean, precise energy of Xerion weaponry, not with the controlled dissolution of bioacid, or the surgical precision of monomolecular blades. This was messy. The blast tore through the chamber's organic seal, shredding tendrils of living alloy like rotten vines. Smoke billowed in, thick and chemical, stinging Xerwind's ocular membranes. Through the haze, figures advanced, human shapes, armored in matte, black plating that drank in the light rather than reflected it. Their movements were methodical, unhurried, and at their head, Commander Samantha Foster stepped through the wreckage, her helmet retracting with a hiss of pressurized seals. Her face was calm, almost bored. "Captain," she said, nodding to Torres. "Commander," he replied, as if they were meeting in a briefing room rather than the heart of an enemy stronghold. Ursek recoiled, his tendrils flicking in distress. How did you find us?" Foster didn't even glance at him. Instead, she reached into her belt and tossed a small spherical device onto the floor. It unfolded with a series of mechanical clicks, projecting a holographic schematic of the Xerion outpost. Every corridor, every chamber, every weakness, highlighted in pulsing red. Torres chuckled. "You really thought we didn't know how your tech works?" Xerwind's blood ran cold. The humans hadn't just breached the station. They'd studied it. Foster finally turned her gaze to Xerwind. There was no hatred there, no triumph. Just a quiet, unnerving certainty. "You made a mistake," she said. "You assumed we'd fight like you." Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. The lights died entirely, plunging the chamber into darkness for one heartbeat. Two. Before the emergency bioluminescence flickered back on, weaker now, dying. Xerwind realized, with dawning horror, that the humans weren't just attacking. They were dismantling. And outside, in the void beyond the shuddering hull, the stars burned cold and indifferent, watching as the galaxy's balance of power fractured in real time. The station groaned like a dying beast, its organic metal ribs shuddering under the relentless assault. Emergency bioluminescence pulsed erratically, casting sickly yellow-green shadows across the chamber. Xerwind's mandibles twitched, tasting the acrid tang of scorched biocircuitry in the air. His people's technology was alive, or had been, before the humans carved into it, like surgeons dissecting a corpse. Ursec's tendrils coiled tight around his data slate, the luminescent glyphs flickering as his mind raced. The humans hadn't just learned their systems, they had understood them, faster than any species in recorded history. The Xerion Dominion had spent centuries perfecting their biomechanical networks, their living architecture evolving through symbiotic harmony. Yet these primates, these chaos-born creatures, had mapped their weaknesses in weeks. Foster stood motionless amid the carnage, her gaze locked on the shuddering holographic schematic. The red pulses weren't just marking structural vulnerabilities, they were timers, countdowns. Torres adjusted his grip on his rifle, the weapon humming with a low, predatory charge. "Funny thing about your tech," he mused, tapping the barrel against a pulsing bio-conduit in the wall. The organic metal flinched. "It bleeds." Xerwind's secondary heart spasmed. Outside, the void was no longer silent. The human fleet moved like a swarm of locusts, their ships jagged, angular, wrong against the graceful curves of Xerion vessels, ripping through defensive formations with terrifying precision. Their weapons didn't just pierce, they corrupted. Plasma lances burned through photosynthetic shielding like acid, leaving necrotic scars in their wake. Railgun rounds punched through living hulls, and where they struck, the biomechanical flesh rotted, as if infected by some invisible plague. Ursec's voice was a whisper. "They weaponized entropy." Foster finally turned, her eyes reflecting the dying light of the station. "No," she said, "we just stopped holding back." Another impact rocked the chamber. The holographic schematic flickered, then dissolved into static. Somewhere deep in the station's core, something screamed, a sound no machine should make. Xerwind's mind reeled. The Dominion had waged war for millennia, their strategies refined, their tactics flawless. They had faced empires that burned worlds, fleets that shattered moons. But this was something else. The humans didn't fight to conquer, they fought to erase. Torres grinned, teeth glinting in the dim light. "You guys ever hear of scorched earth?" Ursec's tendrils went rigid. The station's central plexus, the neural heart of its biosystems, flared once, a final, desperate pulse of emerald light. Then, with a sound like 1,000 bones snapping, it went dark. The humans had not just breached the outpost, they had killed it, and in the silence that followed, Xerwind understood, with cold, absolute clarity, the mistake his people had made. They had assumed humans would fight like them. But humans didn't fight like anything in this galaxy. They fought like the end of the world section Fae. The survivors, the silence was worse than the battle. Xerwind stood motionless in the corpse of his command nexus, his emerald-hued skin dulled under the flickering remains of the station's dying bioluminescence. The air smelled of scorched organic fibers and something acrid. Human explosives, perhaps, or the chemical residue of their weapons. The walls, once pulsing with the steady rhythm of photosynthetic energy, now oozed viscous amber fluid from ruptured vascular conduits. The station wasn't just damaged, it was bleeding. Ursec's tendrils twitched erratically as he knelt beside a shattered console, his normally vibrant lime, green luminescence dimmed to a sickly pallor. His claws trembled as they traced the jagged edges of the wreckage. Not torn apart by energy weapons, but ripped open, as if something had physically clawed its way through the living metal. They had done this, not with superior technology, not with overwhelming firepower. With hands, Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, a reflexive attempt to block out the carnage. It didn't help. The images were burned into his mind, the way the human soldiers had moved, not in disciplined formations, but in a chaotic, predatory swarm. The way they had ignored pain, ignored losses, ignored logic. One of them had taken a plasma lance through the chest, a wound that should have been instantly fatal, and still managed to drag himself forward, teeth bared, to plant a shaped charge on the plexus core. That was not warfare, that was madness. Ursec's voice, when it finally came, was hollow. They knew. Xerwind turned. "The humans," Ursec continued, his voice barely above a whisper. They knew we would underestimate them. They let us. A cold ripple passed through Xerwind's neural frills. The Dominion had studied human history, their wars, their conflicts, their endless cycles of violence, but they had dismissed it as the flailing of a primitive species, too fractured to pose a true threat. A fatal error. Humans didn't fight to win. They fought to survive, and survival, Xerwind realized with dawning horror, made them utterly unpredictable. A sound echoed through the ruined corridor, boots on metal. Deliberate. Xerwind's spines flared instinctively, his body tensing for a fight he already knew he couldn't win. Commander Samantha Foster stepped into the dim light, her armor scarred and smeared with the amber ichor of the station's dying systems. She didn't raise her weapon, didn't even look at him with hostility, just exhaustion, and something worse. Behind her, Captain Mitchell Torres leaned against a collapsed support beam, his grin long gone, replaced by a grim weariness. His left arm hung limp at his side, the armor there melted through from a glancing plasma hit. He didn't seem to care. "You're still alive," Foster observed, her voice rough. "That's something." Xerwind's frills tightened. "You do not take prisoners." It wasn't a question. Foster exhaled, long and slow. "No, we don't." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken understanding. Then Torres pushed off the beam, his movements stiff but deliberate. "But we're not here to finish you off." Airsick's tendrils coiled in disbelief. "Then why?" Foster's gaze flicked to the ruined plexus core, then back to Xerwind. "Because someone needs to go back and tell your people what happened here." Ersick made a sound like a choked whistle, a warning. Torres barked a laugh, sharp, humorless. "No, a lesson." Foster didn't smile. "You thought we fought like animals, like savages." She stepped closer, and for the first time, Xerwind saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly from adrenaline crash. "But we don't," she said softly. "We fight like humans." And in that moment, Xerwind understood. This wasn't mercy. This was propaganda. The Dominion would hear of this battle. They would hear how a single human strike force had dismantled a Xerion outpost, not with superior technology, but with sheer, unfiltered will. They would hear how the humans had torn through living metal with their bare hands, how they had ignored wounds that should have killed them, how they had turned the Dominion's own tactics against them. And they would fear because the galaxy had never seen a species like this, a species that refused to die. Foster turned away, gesturing for Torres to follow. "Let's go. They've seen enough." Torres hesitated, just for a second, his eyes locking with Xerwind's. Then he nodded, not in triumph, not in mockery, in recognition, and then they were gone, vanishing into the shadows of the corpse station, leaving Xerwind and Ersick alone with the wreckage. With the truth, Ersick's voice was barely audible. "What do we do now?" Xerwind stared at the darkened plexus core, its once gleaming surface now a shattered ruin. "We tell them," he said quietly. "We tell them exactly what happened here. Then the Dominion would learn. The hard way." The War College of the Xerion Dominion was a place of organic symmetry, its vaulted ceilings woven from living metal tendrils that pulsed with faint yellow-green bioluminescence. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting in slow rhythmic patterns as photosynthetic energy cells fed on the filtered starlight streaming through the translucent membranes overhead. Cadet Learner Vexus stood at attention in the central amphitheater, his chitinous plate stiff with unease. Around him, the other young officers of the Dominion's military elite shifted in their seats, their crests flickering with subdued agitation. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the faint, metallic tang of mechanical decay, a scent that always lingered in the Dominion's oldest structures. On the central holodisplay, the aftermath of the battle at Outpost Sigma, Fane played in excruciating detail. The humans had left no survivors, not a single one. The footage was grainy, distorted by the dying station's failing systems, but the horror was unmistakable. Human soldiers, small by galactic standards, moved through the wreckage with terrifying efficiency. Their armor was scarred, their weapons crude by Dominion standards, yet they fought with a precision that bordered on madness. One of them, designated Commander Samantha Foster in the tactical logs, stood over the body of a Dominion elite, her plasma rifle still smoking. The elite had been bisected at the waist. His living armor peeled open like the husk of a nutrient pod. Foster didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She simply turned and moved on. Vex's mandibles twitched. This wasn't warfare as the Dominion understood it. Warfare was supposed to be clean, calculated. A matter of superior technology, superior firepower, superior logic. The Dominion had never lost a war, not in 6,000 cycles of galactic dominance. And yet here, in this grainy, flickering holofeed, was proof that they had not just lost. They had been broken. The holodisplay shifted, zooming in on another moment. A human soldier, Captain Mitchell Torres, dragging himself forward despite the gaping wound in his abdomen. His blood was a shocking, vibrant red against the Dominion's muted bio. Metallic surfaces he shouldn't have been able to move. But he did, and when he reached the Dominion's plexus core, the heart of the station's power grid, he didn't hesitate, he didn't stop, then he detonated the charges. The feed cut to static. Vex's instructor, a grizzled veteran of the Dominion's expansion wars, stepped forward. His bioluminescent crest was dull with age, his carapace scarred from battles long past. "This," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum, "is what happens when you underestimate them." A murmur rippled through the cadets. "The humans do not fight like us," the instructor continued. "They do not retreat when wounded. They do not surrender when outmatched. They do not stop, not ever." Vex's claws flexed involuntarily. "And now," the instructor said, "they have taught us something." He turned, his multifaceted eyes scanning the assembled cadets. "They have taught us fear." The words hung in the air like a toxin. Vex's had been raised on stories of Dominion supremacy, of inevitable victory, of a galaxy that would one day bow beneath the weight of their living technology, their perfect order. Now he understood. The humans had looked into the abyss of annihilation and laughed. And the Dominion had blinked. The instructor activated the holodisplay once more. This time, it showed not battle footage, but a single line of text, a new doctrine, hastily drafted in the wake of Sigma, Phi's fall. Directive Phi Alpha, do not engage human forces without overwhelming numerical superiority. Assume all human warriors will fight to the death. Expect no quarter, give none. Vexus exhaled slowly. The galaxy had changed, and the Dominion would never be the same. End story. Additional section. The holodisplay flickered again, this time shifting to a tactical map of the Sigma phase system. The once pristine Dominion outposts were now little more than debris fields, their bioluminescent wreckage drifting in the void like embers from a dying fire. Vexus stared at the carnage, his mandibles twitching. The humans had not just won. They had erased Sigma, Phi from the galactic ledger. No negotiations, no demands, just annihilation. And the worst part, they had done it with scraps. The Dominion's intelligence reports had been clear. Human vessels were cobbled together from salvaged tech, their weapons rigged, their crews operating on desperation and spite. And yet, they had broken the unbreakable. A low murmur spread through the cadets. One of them, younger than the rest, dared to speak. "Instructor, what do we do now?" Vexus hesitated. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. The Dominion's doctrine had always been absolute, victory through perfection, order through control. But the humans had shattered that illusion. They fought with chaos, with unpredictability, with a ferocity that defied all logic. Now the Dominion had a choice: adapt or die. The holodisplay darkened. The lesson was over. But the war had only just begun. Final ending this edition maintains the grim, reflective tone, reinforces the theme of Dominion uncertainty, shows the physical aftermath of the battle, ends on an ominous note, implying future conflict, flows naturally from the previous ending without redundancy.